All crypto valuations are bullshit for the most part. They launch a token, they get demotivated, they never ship anything again. Can you make money? And then importantly, how can you translate that value back into your token and the token price?
Ethan, how you doing, man? Welcome.
I'm doing pretty good. I'm a little bit wet from all the rain that I had to traverse to get here, but I'm doing all right.
As everyone has mentioned in every single episode, and as you can tell from me wearing the same shirt in the last 3 episodes, like we're doing back-to-back podcasts here in Seoul. So yeah, today we had a rainy day, and Ethan's made his brave way to the studio.
An hour and a half in an Uber to get here, and walking across rainy streets, and so it's better be good.
I'm just gonna say that Solana's head of engineering takes the bus. We should learn from him. Yeah. So we wanted to do a dedicated episode about Particle Network itself. In this podcast series, of course, we're talking about the real world assets, about stable coins, about consumer dApps, and Particle Network is effectively the universal transaction layer powering all of this. So we wanted to start just by talking about how do you see the state of chain abstraction? How do you see everything that's going on since we TGE'd, and how things have gone down in a world that gets progressively more interested in stuff like DAT, CTFs, and so on?
There's a lot. Let's talk about that.
Unpack it all.
Yeah, I think we can start with like chain abstraction, right?
I know you can talk.
Yeah, I can talk a lot about chain abstraction and this whole topic. I think so. We'll start with chain abstraction. We'll talk about TGE, and then we'll kind of go from there. So I think with chain abstraction, when we first entered the whole chain abstraction space, like a year and a half ago at this point, right? It was a very small narrative, and we saw it to grow to what it was at the peak, which was, let's say, I don't know, like October of last year, November of last year, which was tons of attention. Like on Kaido, the mind share for chain abstraction was like 2% of
Massive,
the whole.
Yeah.
It was huge. And so, and that was a lot of fun, and we got a lot of attention during that time. But what you saw is that despite my best efforts on Twitter, earlier into this year, people started to talk about chain abstraction less. I don't think it's like, I think people just get bored with topics in Web3, and so you have some things that like get a lot of attention for a while.
I feel like they also got bored of like infra narratives.
That was one thing. So like chain abstraction, to be honest, it followed the modular narrative very closely. And so you had the modular narrative, and then immediately after that was followed, and some part of it was sort of joined by the chain abstraction narrative. But as these kind of things got less popular and people became more tired of just like talking about scalability and user experience, now we went into prediction markets and perps platforms, and the whole thing that we're in today, AI, right? That was something that like I think that probably was the main thing that succeeded the whole chain abstraction narrative. Wasn't okay, now everybody's like the next shiny object is AI, and so I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. But I think the other problem with the chain abstraction narrative, and the reason why maybe it didn't last as long as it could, was that there really wasn't any tangibility to it for the whole duration of the narrative being popular until we released Universal X for the most part. And so since the narrative began up until it kind of died out a little bit, there was never anything to anchor the narrative in something practical. And this is why and I was so tired about talking about this, and I'm glad that we moved on as an industry. But I did so many podcasts talking about what is chain abstraction and trying to define the word and telling people the same thing every day. And I'd get on Twitter the next day and people would say something else and say something the opposite of what I say. And then I'm arguing with people on Twitter. And so,
but that was good though, because we had different perspectives, and you were arguing with them, but you were doing it nicely though. Like you weren't like, we welcomed everyone to the chain abstraction narrative. And I think that was a very positive thing for the industry. It
was good, but I think because there is no tangibility to it, because there's no practicality to the whole chain abstraction idea, there's never any consensus around what exactly is it, right? And what does it represent as a user experience? And so that was a big problem. And I think that's also a reason why people tended to detach themselves from the narrative quickly, because we're just like throwing around a word at that point. I think Universal X was a good milestone for the chain abstraction narrative, but
totally.
Really, there wasn't anybody else that, like, Universal X grew a little bit and had some good attention, but nobody else kind of joined us in trying to build an application that represented the narrative. So I was expecting that at some point the hype would die down, but I think nothing has changed about like the fundamental utility of chain abstraction, how just critical it is for the industry. And I actually think it's somewhat of a good thing. What I told somebody in one of the last podcasts I did is that I think the biggest like thing with the whole chain abstraction narrative dying is that, let's say there's 70 projects that were saying they were doing chain abstraction. Of those 70, today there's 5. So, okay, everybody's grifting basically. Everybody's bullshitting you about what they're actually doing.
And I wanted to add before, a big component of this was people or projects wanting to be chain abstraction. Like they wanted to tell you, project number 1 is chain abstraction. We are the chain abstraction layer for this. We are the... Yeah, people wanted to call themselves chain abstraction. And what the angle that we were pushing is that this is an user experience. This is something that you build into your product or into your industry, your vertical. And Universal X effectively does that. Universal X presents a chain abstracted experience to trading, just as like the project we had in our previous podcast, like Minara presents a chain abstracted experience in AI bots and so on and so forth for every project integrating chain abstraction. So definitely that's taking a turn to where we're seeing less blabbering and we're more effective solutions, more products that integrate that.
Sometimes, but I think like the one thing that I realized, and it took me a long time to realize this, I mean, I've been in this space for like 5-6 years now, and
you're just about to say something that I told you like 8 months before.
Probably, yeah. But I always thought that like, when products called themselves like chain abstracted or AI or I don't know, to insert some word here, and that's genuinely what they wanted to do. But what I realized, especially after, and even during chain abstraction, I believe that most people that were doing chain abstraction actually were doing it because that's what they wanted to do. But what I realized is that 9 or 8 out of 10 products in this space don't really do anything but find some interesting words and just talk shit on Twitter basically and just say, well, hey, we're doing chain abstraction. Okay, that's not really working. We're doing AI. Okay, that's not really working. We're doing a layer for prediction market platforms.
What percentage do you think that's incompetence versus just outright grifting?
I think it's a mixture of both. I think people really, and I think this is a problem with a lot of startups, and I continually realize how important it is to think above this problem, especially now that we're post-TGE, and we'll talk about that. But I think one of the biggest problems is lack of attention span and patience. And so what happens is that people, and maybe it's not all malice, right? Maybe it's a lot of it's genuine. Like, okay, chain abstraction, this is pretty cool. We should try to do something with this, right? So now we're going to do a chain abstracted blah blah blah, right? And I think some of it is like they know that they're bullshitting you, but the other part of it is that I think sometimes they really want to build something and they get too bored with it too quickly. And as soon as they don't see immediate results of like we're winning right now, then they move to something else and they just do this over and over again. And I realized how important it is, especially recently at post-TGE, how important it is to like just stay consistent with something and to like stick to technology that you build and actually see something through. And so I believe that we've done this with chain abstraction. Like I think despite the narrative dying, early this year, I think that we have basically, I think it's us and maybe 2 other organizations that have actually delivered on what we promised. And we have not only delivered it, but we've continued to not only improve the core technology, but also ship it in an application that is now one of the top 10 generally on-chain trading platforms that we built out purely to showcase chain abstraction. And because of chain abstraction now, it's grown so much. And so I think we kind of have held on to conviction around this technology and this narrative and are now growing it and branching it out in a lot of different areas that I have high hopes for. But I think it was, I think we did it the right way. I think most people did it the wrong way because they were just simply impatient.
Okay, so let's go right into it since you gave me the cue. Universal X, the app that was created to showcase chain abstraction, it is one of the top 10 on-chain trading platforms. Obviously, it depends on how you define on-chain trading platforms. If you're counting just about any DEX, maybe not.
But I wouldn't call those trading platforms. I mean, that's like I'm talking about like Axiom and
trading,
and
yeah, like classified across all these platforms that are like more, not so much like swap terminals, like your Uniswaps, and your cross-chain bridges with swaps included and that type of thing, and pretty much effectively the only chain-agnostic trading platform. So you have Universal X that's generating X amount of revenue. Can we talk about it? Can we say the number?
Yeah.
How much?
We're doing like right now, we charge 1% on every transaction. We do
Except for top 500 coins.
except for top 500, which we do 0.1%. But if you look at our public data, we make anywhere between 10, 20 to 30, $40,000 a day, which can be anywhere from $300,000 to over $1 million a month. It just depends on the month and the campaigns that we're running and these different things.
The market.
It's in the market and the meme coin appetite. It fluctuates a lot. Like people are really into meme coins at some point. They aren't really into it. The market's doing great. And now everybody wants to trade shit coins. And so it changes a lot. But I think generally our consistency is like, if you average out all of our volume over the past like year, it comes out to around 1.5 million per day, which is, $15,000 a day to some degree, which is great. And I'll tell you that it's more than 99.9% of projects in this space make. So I'm happy with it for now. But our ambitions are that, of course, we want, like, this revenue is great. Like, it's good to make that amount of money. But to be honest, that's not that much money. And so what we want to do is get to a point where, like, our next major milestone is like 10 million a day in not revenue. I would love that, but in volume, which would yield $100,000 a day in revenue. And then eventually, if we can
basically
scale that,
5x.
Yeah, I think it's possible. I think it's like that's actually pretty reasonable. It's not that hard. Especially like I think Universal X has achieved this revenue number, despite being a somewhat underdeveloped app relative to the other competitors. We've only been building Universal X in a somewhat limited capacity for 8 months. Before that, it was mostly a tech demo. Like, we weren't seriously investing resources into it. And so our time with this app has been relatively low. But despite the fact that it does have objective shortcomings relative to more developed platforms that have been around for years, like Axiom, for example, or GMGN, we've still been able to, assert it as this platform that is making a pretty, I would consider to be like a pretty significant amount of revenue relative to the other apps in the space.
Correct me if I'm wrong on this. It does seem to me like the race for developing these trading platforms has staled a little bit. Like, it did seem like for a while, like Axiom and GMGN and ourselves and the other projects in this sphere, we were all like racing towards being like new feature this week, new feature in 3 days, new feature in 2 weeks. And it does feel like the speed game has sort of reached its maximum speed. The user experience game has sort of staled. Is this the case, or are you seeing like these projects also like still racing, still going as fast as they were once going?
I think the meme coin market in general is lower. And so like people aren't as enthusiastic about trading meme coins, which means that by proxy, these products are not as, at least like maybe they're still working as hard as they were, but it's not as public, right? When they do some big update. But to be honest, Axiom's volume is still great. And I'll tell you this, like while GMGN's volume and Photon's volume has been generally falling, Padre, which I'm sure you've heard me talk about these guys a lot. I obsess with Padre because I think I'd have to watch this, but the Padre team is very, I think they're the only example of a successful trading platform that has been able to have net positive growth that is, though it's not already well established over the past year or so, right? So like we can look at GMGN and Photon. Both these apps have been around for a long time.
Yeah, Padre was pretty much the only one that appeared out of nowhere and made a big name out of themselves.
Well, they've been around for a while, but they weren't really used that much. Like they were a pretty small platform that was doing under $1 million a day in volume, like 500K, 300K, 200K a day, right? And so it was pretty, they were what you would consider a dead platform for a long time. And then they locked in basically and built out what was a really great update. And their whole strategy was that they just copied Axiom and made it 10% better with lower fees. And so since then, I won't say like they've been able to capture like half of Axiom's volume, but I think they're doing like upwards of 30 million a day in volume. Axiom is doing like 100 million to 200 million a day in volume. So they've been able to capture like a good chunk of Axiom's user market just from simply building a platform that's the same as Axiom, making it a little bit better in some areas, adding some extra features. And of course, they've invested a lot of money in KOLs and BD and these different things that has contributed to their success. But I think Padre is proof that if you can nail the fundamentals of building a good platform, of, paying the right people basically, of partnering with the right people, of giving people what they want, what they ask for, then you can generate volume. And I do think that, like, especially with our moat of chain abstraction, that we have the potential to get at least to 10 million. Now, of course, this isn't like the only goal that we have at Particle. Like the only thing that we're doing right now is trying to generate volume and build all these things. But we want to do that, and I think that's not a conflict with the other things that we want to do. And revenue is like we've talked a lot about this, you and I, over the past few days, and I've talked with our CEO a lot about this. It's like basically nothing in this space matters if you're not making revenue. And you can look at all these projects that used to have a lot of hype and they TGE'd, and if they TGE and they never make revenue, they will always, every time, they will always die. Every project in this space. I mean, there's maybe a few exceptions, like even like Solana and Ethereum, they make revenue, and so like if you're not making revenue, you will die. And so if you don't make revenue, it doesn't matter what token price you have, or if
you're burning money. Basically.
You're just waiting. It's just you're just there's a clock that's ticking down until you run out of money, until you die, and then your token price as well. I mean, even if you can do some crime and get your token price way up for some reason, I mean, it's true. That's great and all, but if you don't have any revenue to sustain that, and it's all just like it's basically an exit for you. And so I think that any project that is serious about survival in the long term, beyond just some sort of exit, they need to prioritize revenue. And so essentially what we're doing is we are relentlessly, above anything else, prioritizing generating revenue through integrations and through Universal X. And so from the Universal X side, if we're making 100K a day, then I'll be, I guess I told you this the other day. I said, if we can do 100K a day, I'll sleep pretty well at night compared to how I sleep right now. And so
it doesn't fucking sleep.
Yeah, I'll be able to relax a little bit, but and I think we can get to that pretty quickly as long as you just focus on the fundamentals.
And I was talking about revenue earlier with our guest from Centrifuge. I've been talking about revenue a lot lately, including with you, because it's such an under-acknowledged thing in crypto. It's kind of like an ongoing joke in crypto for like the last 2 weeks, which is like an era in Web3 that people are discovering revenue. People are discovering that projects should make money. And this is, I think, very related to Pump's launch of their token. So ever since that, there's been an ongoing conversation about revenue, about how projects should behave in terms of tokenomics, that I think is a very healthy conversation, which we're going to ruin anyways because we're crypto. But we are in the middle of that conversation right now, and people are realizing there's very few projects that actually generate revenue. And one thesis that I've had for a long time is that crypto's market caps related to revenue or related to stuff like TVL are pretty much random at this point. Like, people might overshoot, like a market cap might be twice the TVL of a project, thrice, nowhere near the revenue generated. Like nowhere does that ever get taken into account. And you can see it with projects that generate a lot of revenue like Uniswap, and projects that don't generate a lot of revenue like everything else. So obviously people want us to talk about the party token. How do you see like the role of the revenue generated by Universal X in relation to the token? Because I think we should continue letting people know that there is an L1 blockchain running underneath this that consumes the token, and that there are positive tokenomics associated with this, as opposed to if it was just a trading platform. And of course, there is the universe of applications using universal accounts that is also going to be running on top of this. But of course, there are no huge integrations right now. So with the biggest thing being Universal X, how do you see that relationship?
I think, first of all, I'll talk about that. But the first thing is, like, I wanted to comment something you said. I mean, like, the fact that we're realizing as an industry that making money is important as, like, some revelation is ridiculous. It's just like, you know.
That's how good we are. Future of finance.
I can't believe,
Future of finance guys.
We've come across something incredible. You know, we made a great realization that I think is revolutionary. And it's that, you know what? We should try to make money.
With our investors' hard-earned cash, we should try and turn it into more money, not less.
We should try to be profitable. How about, you know, this is a pretty new thing. I posted something on Twitter. I said, I mean, if you ask anybody that's ever done it, I mean, any business, you go ask the convenience store manager down the street, you say, hey, what's the biggest thing, the most important thing for a business? Making money. I mean, this is ridiculous that people have found it acceptable to just, like, never make any money and launch a token and then like slowly die out. And to be honest, this is like, I'll start with this. And I think I'm glad that we can talk about the token because it's an important part of like what I think a lot about with our project. And it's this. And so I think I spent a lot of time looking at other products in this space that have been around for longer than we have and that have already gone through a token launch. And the pattern that I see that's pretty consistent is that they launch a token, right? They have a lot of hype. The token goes up, starts really high, goes down, maybe goes up a little bit more. But eventually it always just results in this slow bleed off, right? Where the team, they never ship anything again. They just tweet bullshit or whatever, right? They just do random things just to fill time, right? But they never actually do anything significant. They never make any money. And the token just basically, eventually maybe it settles at some big market cap. And there's a lot of tokens actually that still have huge market caps that are exactly like this, but they started much higher, right? And the market cap just still happens to be high. So like to answer your question about valuation, all crypto valuations are bullshit for the most part. It's just like, how high did you start? And what are kind of the economics of the token and these kind of things. And so a lot of it is not directly tied to revenue, but some of it is. But just to kind of go back to my point, I think there's a very common trap of projects, which is that they launch a token, they get demotivated, they never ship anything again, and that token bleeds off. They don't have good economics, and these kind of things happen.
Or that you effectively get founders whose only ability is fundraising, or
Right.
their only ability is getting to a stage where you launch a token.
Right. I think that, we have recognized that this is a common trap. And I think, as I said, our ambitions are, we do not want to be one of the projects that, just like launch the token. That's it. I think our number one priority, because our number one priority is revenue, I do think that is not something that immediately translates to a pump in token price. I think anything that you can do that will pump the token price right now is most often crime. And so, in my opinion, I think that if you launch your token and it doesn't immediately like hyperliquid or whatever, I think we launched a token at a time where we had some revenue, but it wasn't a huge amount of revenue. We had some traction, but it wasn't a huge amount of traction. And also the economics could have been a little bit better. And so our token is like decent. I mean, we're listed on a lot of good exchanges. Like the price is okay. I mean, it hasn't dropped as much as a lot of other products have, but still we can do a lot better. And I think a lot of it comes down to the fact that, of course, as we make more revenue, as Universal X grows in revenue, and as these kind of things happen, and as we focus and prioritize simply making money, this has to translate value back to the token. Of course, not only for investors, but also just in general. I mean, it's a representation of the project itself and what we built. Whether you like it or not, the token is an important part of it. I know a lot of products, they like to ignore it and just kind of like say, oh, we'll deal with it later. But the way that I see it is that there's only one solution to not only the token price in the long term, but also just your longevity as a business. And it is, how can you make money and how can you be a sustainable business? And the way that translates back into the token, I mean, like I said, token valuation is most often not entirely dictated by how much money you're making in the present moment. It's not like a stock, right? Like a stock, of course, is like a direct derivative of like your performance as a business.
Earnings.
Yeah, like your earnings, and it's like one-to-one tied to what you're doing as a business for the most part. There's a few exceptions like GameStop or Tesla or whatever, but I think generally crypto is much. It's number one, entirely speculative, and number two, the valuation part of it and the price action has a lot to do with just kind of like playing economic games. But the one thing that we can control beyond doing these things, I mean, of course, we try our best to do the right engagements, these kind of things to keep the token afloat, like have a lot of liquidity, do a lot of campaigns. But the most important thing, I think, comes down to things like, buybacks and burns, controlling a larger part of the token supply and having positive buy pressure. I think, of course, like people like to reference Hyperliquid, like this is the best example, but I think there's a reason why Hyperliquid and Pump and these other projects prioritize this, because it's not only like a narrative thing, but it's also if you're making revenue and you have a token, you have a responsibility to bring value back to that token. You launch that token, and again, that's a representation of your project. And so if your number one goal is to make revenue, your number two goal should be what are you going to do with that revenue? And of course, part of it needs to be reinvesting into the project. You can't do 100% revenue buybacks because then you have no money to reinvest. So you need to have some part of that revenue be used for buybacks and burns, some part of that revenue be used to reinvest back into R&D and these kind of things to continue pushing yourself forward. We haven't announced anything public like buybacks and burns yet. I think Universal X and the revenue for Universal X is moderate, but it can be higher. We have a lot of other plans to bolster higher revenue as well. So what we'll probably do is the goal is that this year, as we improve our revenue and these kind of things, we're considering to do some sort of like buyback and burn mechanism. In the long term, of course, we want this. It's just more about the timeline and when it lines up with our revenue generation path. But to recap it, like to say it bluntly, I mean, it's like our number one priority is revenue generation. In my opinion, this is the thing that separates projects that die and the projects that don't. Can you make money? And then importantly, how can you translate that value back into your token and the token price, which comes down to using the money that you make to buy the token or burn the token, and therefore control up a larger part of the supply or decrease the total supply. Of course, it's much more nuanced and complicated than that, but I think this is the fundamental part of how do you improve a token long term. So like it's a huge priority for us. It's hugely important for us. But we look at everything now as how are we going to improve this over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, and not how can we create some artificial pump tomorrow. I mean, that's obviously not a sustainable way of looking at things. So that's my theory about successful versus not successful products in the long term.
Mm-hmm. We also want to a great degree, obviously there are separate goals, right? Because one thing is running infrastructure and the other is running an application. So when we think about running an application, Universal X, we think about these metrics, we think about revenue, we talk about volume, we think about like the user experience we have and how we can get it closer to Web 2 products, not even the most popular Web 3 products. And then we also think about the infrastructure in terms of who's using it besides ourselves. That's been a huge goal of ours, to take on the narratives and take on the, let's not call it narratives, let's call it use cases. In the use cases that will consume it better and will make the most out of this technology that we build, this chain abstraction technology that we build. So lately we've sort of shifted our messaging slightly to focus more on RWA and stablecoin projects about digital tokenized assets, so that we can more directly focus on the biggest use cases in crypto, on serving this technology to where things are happening. How do you see this vertical and how do you see this change in messaging? Which doesn't mean we've altered the product. I mean, the product is exactly the same underneath the hood, just to make that super clear.
Yeah, I think some people saw, like, the fact that we started talking about RWAs. I mean, of course, it's like a very hot topic in the space. Like, I won't act like it's not. But I think we felt like our positioning was a little bit too broad, and that we could potentially tighten it a little bit by focusing on use cases that were more, that would benefit more from chain abstraction. I think there's a lot of use cases in the space that we realize just are not really that important for chain abstraction and the SDKs that we provide. Like, let's talk about a few. Like, we can look at like lending and borrowing. Like, do I really need lending and borrowing? Like, do I need to like consolidate, bounce multiple chains for that? Probably not. If I'm doing that, I can probably bridge. Do I, like, for yield farming, do I really need that? Probably not. Maybe in some cases it would be helpful, but there's all these things that are like very complicated DeFi use cases that are also very common applications that do not have a huge benefit from chain abstraction. But the applications that do are more retail-facing use cases, which right now, to be honest, the predominant retail-facing use cases are things like tokenization. It's things like stablecoins, things like RWAs. And in my opinion, there is no other vertical in the space that has really been able to penetrate the retail market in any capacity relative to RWAs and stablecoins. I mean, just stablecoins alone as a vertical, payments, and there's a lot of apps coming out right now that like use stablecoins to buy tokenized stocks and these kind of things. And so this is a use case that, in my opinion, will be the majority of consumer adoption and consumer use cases over the past or over the next 1 to 2 years. So what we want to do is just make it clear that our SDKs are not necessarily for the developers that are building like, I don't know, some incredibly complicated, highly optimized yield farming platform. They can use it if they want, but what we want is retail-facing use cases, things that are going after consumers, because that's who benefits the most from our SDKs. But also, I want to make this clear as well. It's like, I think we talked about a few things here regarding the ideal use cases and the SDKs and the universal X revenue and token and these kind of things. I want to just like set out real quick like what my vision for Particle Network is, let's say over the next 6 months, 1 year, right? So the first thing is that, of course, I would love for Particle Network to like have 2 or 3 revenue streams. One from Universal X, goal is like 100K a day in revenue, right? One from our SDKs. I can't quantify that right now, but we take 25 bips on all of our transactions that go through our SDKs. We're going to be targeting retail-facing apps that are building in RWAs, building in stablecoins. We're going to be targeting wallets like Phantom, MetaMask, Rainbow. If any of them are listening, then I'd love to talk to you because that's who we want using our SDKs. And we're also going to be potentially building out some more apps in-house, kind of adjacent to Universal X, that will also generate revenue. And so I want like 2 or 3 revenue streams that are all contributing to our balance sheet that we can then use to do buybacks and burns consistently with a significant amount of revenue that actually makes a difference in buy and sell pressure and token supply. That's the first thing, and that's the most important thing. At the same time, I want Particle Network as a brand. I want it to be very clear exactly what we do and the applications and the tools that we target as an SDK. I want developers to understand exactly how they can build with Particle Network very clearly. I want them to, understand what our SDKs enable, what they don't enable, and I want ideally hundreds of applications, as well as some very big applications ideally, and big wallets to be using our SDKs. So in the next 1 year, 3 revenue sources. I want very consistent buybacks and burns that are coming through those 3 revenue sources to a point where it makes a difference in token supply and these kind of things. And I also want our positioning and our brand to be very clear to developers ideally so that they can understand exactly what we do. I think right now, people still see us as like, I think people still get confused about the chain abstraction narrative and our target audience for developers and our different products. And so I think, and it's partially our fault and my fault and just like a little bit muddy the brand. But I think we've made a lot of improvements over the past few months to really add some clarity here. And so I want that to be done. At the same time, I want to really dial down on those revenue sources. And I think if we can do that, our token will be in a good spot. As a business, of course, we are already profitable, but we'll be very profitable, which is what I want. And at the same time, I think we'll be able to elevate our brand presence quite a lot. So maybe we can look back at this podcast in 1 year and see if that's been achieved. But this is my vision and my goal for what I want Particle Network to be. And what I think we can hopefully do.
And a big part of that, I think it goes both ways when it comes to RWAs and stablecoins. I think we are talking about projects using our infrastructure, which is a big part. But in the infrastructure part, another thing that we're very interested on is in incorporating the best of the best infrastructure that there is around in crypto and including it in our stack. So, for example, we announced that we will be using Circle's gateway to settle all USDC transactions. And there are several other integrations that are in the works. So we effectively want these SDKs to be the way through which people interact with all the real world assets directly. You can think of it as like, to name a few things, like let the best stablecoin for the Mexican peso is there, like settled immediately within universal accounts. So anytime you want to do a transaction that's denominated in this currency, and doesn't have to be a fiat currency, can also be a cryptocurrency, it happens automatically under the hood. So you don't have to think about it, and you, the developer of an application, don't need to manually set all of this up, which is a big part of chain abstraction. I mean, we've always talked about chain abstraction as something that encompasses an experience, but you cannot yourself build every single particle itself, cannot build the user experience that encompasses every single utility, every single use case your user might want to do. So you need effectively all these solutions combined within an overall, let's call it aggregator of solutions that makes it all possible. And that's what we want to do with RWAs and stablecoins. We want to be that aggregator for your developer and for your everyday user. Since we have 5 more minutes to go, is there anything else you'd like to tell the community of developers watching this, the community of retail users that might still be interested in Particle, that might want to learn more about Party and so on?
If there's retail users watching this, I would be very surprised. I think it's mostly going to be token holders and Twitter users potentially.
I mean,
yeah, maybe.
I'm not going to argue.
if you're a retail user, you should go use Universal X, and we have more things in store.
You should definitely go use Universal X. It's an excellent platform.
Yeah, but I think the main thing is like, of course, I'm very bullish on what we're doing, and every person at their own product is going to say we're doing great things. But I'll just make it super clear. Like, I think what we want to do over the long term is like, I think that we've we've been able to develop a technology that virtually nobody else in this space has been able to do, because chain abstraction and universal accounts is not an easy thing. It's not like a simple, straightforward thing that we realize. It is a very complicated and a very multifaceted technology. It makes use of its own independent blockchain for cross-chain transaction validation. We have our own solver set. So it's just, there's all these things that go into it that is basically exclusively by particle at this point. And our number one goal is to make good use of it and to make sure that it lasts, and that, of course, that value comes back to our token and these kind of things. But also at the same time, we can empower our own use cases, Universal X, maybe some other things that we're working on. I have some ideas that we've been talking about during our trip in Korea. That
word on the streets that there's big things coming. Yeah,
we have a lot of things that we want to announce over the next few months. But I think the most important thing is Universal X in the short term. Bigger use cases, bigger integrations over the next few months. We have a lot planned in terms of we're expanding our team. We're investing more resources into our SDKs. We have a lot of updates for SDKs. We're going to announce a revamped SDK. Bigger integration partners. Like I said, we announced Circle recently. We announced Xtalks. We announced that we're working with Ava Labs on our L1. We're going to be announcing a few more over the next few months, hopefully. And so we're like, this is one of the busiest times for Particle since even before TGE for the most part. And I think, this is the hardest part about building a startup in Web3 is after TGE. Pre-TGE is easy. Anybody can do pre-TGE. It's incredibly easy to just like build some hype and do some bullshit. But like to actually build a business that's sustainable, this is why most people fail in Web3, because they aren't incapable of doing this. And I think that we are one of the few teams that we've already been able to do this. We are already a profitable, sustainable business, but I think we can be so much more than just that. And so that's my goal. But let's see. Let's come back to this podcast in a year. If anybody's watching, and if it's a year since this was posted, then you can tag me on Twitter and say, has this been done? And I'll either give you a very defeated answer or a victorious answer. So we'll see. But this is my hope for what we're doing and some expectations to set.
Yeah. I think we've covered pretty much everything we wanted to cover, right? So thank you very much for watching. Thank you very much for joining us at the Real World Value, this Particle Network episode. Like and subscribe and all that, please. It helps us continue to bring great guests like we have in this season 1. So thank you very much, Ethan.
Yeah.
And I'll catch you guys next time.
Thanks, man.